if Kyiv acknowledges Crimea as Russian territory and Donetsk and Luhansk as independent states. Moscow is also demanding that Ukraine stop all military action and change its constitution to reject any intention to join NATO or the European Union. Joining me right now is Fox News senior strategic analyst, General Jack Keane. General, great to see you this morning. Thanks so much for being here. Your thoughts on these demands from Russia?
Well, they're unlikely for Ukraine to agree to that. I mean, those demands were made before the war, certainly. It strikes me those demands go right at the heart of Ukraine because they redraw their boundaries. They rob them of their national identity in terms of them now becoming a neutral state, and they rob them of the right for self-determination. I don't see how Zelensky at all will accept a deal like that. But also, remember, this is what many of us thought would be the objective of the Russian military, to go in only into the eastern part of Ukraine, mainly to achieve the objectives that they're just stating here. But they surprised us and went into all of Ukraine to topple the government and put it in a pro-Russian friendly government. I think, obviously, what is happening here, Maria, is those military objectives that they assigned to themselves are being stalled, as we all know. It's 13 days now, and they've not made a lot of progress on trying to topple the government in Kyiv, and they haven't really captured a major Ukrainian city. They still don't own the airspace because Ukrainian aircraft are flying, and as reported, they may indeed have shot down some Russian aircraft last night, and their cyber war inexplicably has not been very effective whatsoever. So the Russians certainly are readdressing the issue here and hoping to carve out a position that gives them possibly an exit ramp. But these conditions will not be acceptable to the Ukrainians.
And yet many people are worried that Putin is not going to stop at Ukraine and will, in fact, do something to one of the NATO countries. Do you worry that the Baltic states are next? Secretary of State Antony Blinken is assuring that the Baltic states have the support that they need. Here's what he said yesterday. Watch this.
We will defend every inch of NATO territory against aggression coming from anywhere at any time. Our commitment to Article 5, an attack on one is an attack on all, is ironclad. The President has called it sacrosanct, and no one should have any doubt about that.
General Blinken also said that NATO is considering keeping troops in the region on a more permanent basis. Do you worry that Putin is not done and he will, in fact, go to the Baltic states next?
Yeah, the senior officials that I'm in contact with, particularly in the Pentagon, clearly believe we're in a very dangerous period here. And certainly the risk of expansion is really true. You can tell by their visits. Last week, Secretary Austin in the Baltics and Poland. This week, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs is there as well. Secretary Blinken visiting two of the Baltic states. There is genuine concern here that there can be an expansion of this conflict. And listen, the amount of deterrence that we have had in the Baltics and Poland has not been adequate in terms of NATO troops in those countries. We've had the minimum. Now we've got to fix that problem, and we're moving in that direction. We truly have to establish an effective military deterrence. It's not enough to have a large NATO power on paper and not have it deployed to where the threat is. And that is the awakening that has taken place, and we're readjusting now the forces and obviously moving them to the east to put in place a deterrence. This is what Putin genuinely respects. He respects strength. When he sees it there, then he's going to recognize it. Rhetoric, diplomacy, what we have tried in the past, generally appeasement, it doesn't work. That's why we are where we are today. So, yes, there's a concern here, Maria. There's no doubt about it.
China's foreign minister describing Russia as China's most important strategic partner. we know that this partnership has strengthened. He said that it's one of the most crucial bilateral relationships in the world. But what I want to ask you about is Israel, because over the weekend we saw the Prime Minister of Israel meet with Zelensky in Ukraine, meet with in Moscow. We believe he spoke with the leadership there as well. And now we see that the CEO of Chevron says that a natural gas pipeline from Israel to Europe could help alleviate this shortage. Your thoughts on an Israeli component?
Well, what's going on here with the Israelis, it's a recognition, frankly, that when Russia went in and propped up the Assad regime with air power and actually sustained a regime that was close to failing, as a result of that, the Iranians gained strength and they began to put more pressure on Israel. Israel had to take them on because they were trying to establish bases in Syria from which they could attack Israel. Therefore, Israelis began a number of airstrikes. To facilitate those airstrikes, they had to make a deal with the Russians, who were controlling the airspace, to let us conduct those airstrikes. And Netanyahu made a number of visits to see Putin to get that accommodation. This is a recognition that Russia has influence in the Middle East at the expense of the United States. This is why Saudi Arabia and the UAE have been kind of silent on the Ukraine issue, because the influence of Russia in the Middle East. And it was a huge mistake that took place there at the expense of the United States. What the Israeli Prime Minister is trying to do, certainly he wants this conflict to end, and I'm certain he's made overtures to that degree. Some think actually he could be one of the people to help negotiate a peace accord here. But the fact is that Israel has a relationship with Russia because of the security situation and the threat that they have from Syria. That is what has really taken place there.
Really an important point. General, good to see you this morning. Thanks so much. General Jack Keane, always spot on. We will see you soon, General. Thank you.